There are some hidden angles to the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Here, we'll have a look at this corridor from four different angles, such as India's centrality, connectivity of India with Central Asia, comparison with Belt and Road Initiative of China, and a supposedly emerging Cold War scenario between United States and China. But before discussing these four aspects, we have to fundamentally understand what this corridor is all about. So this is finalized during the G20 summit in New Delhi, and primarily it's a logistical connectivity initiative through shipping lanes and railways. It has two components: an eastern corridor that connects Middle East and India, and a western corridor that connects Middle East to Europe. This doesn't mean that the initiative is only about connectivity. No, it has some other components as well. For example, there is a hydrogen pipeline and an electricity grid aimed at ensuring the energy security between these two continents, and there is also a high-speed data cable network. The signatories countries to the corridor include India, Saudi Arabia and UAE, United States, France, Germany, and European Union. But we have to keep in mind that even though the countries like Greece, Israel, and Jordan are not among the signatory countries, the corridor actually passes through these countries. It's time for us to have a look at the corridor in little more detail. So first of all, the corridor starts from the western coast of India and connects the Mumbai port all the way to the United Arab Emirates Dubai port. From Dubai, it traverses the entire length and breadth of Saudi Arabia through important industrial centers like Harad and Riyadh. From Saudi Arabia, it reaches the Mediterranean port of Haifa in Israel, and from Haifa, through a shipping lane, it enters the Europe through Piraeus port in Greece. Now let us discuss the four different aspects that I have mentioned earlier, one by one. First is the centrality of India. If I hypothetically extend the corridor from India's eastern coast all the way to Southeast Asia, it becomes a trade route between Europe and Southeast Asia, with India being placed at the nerve center of it. We have to keep in mind that 21st century is an Asian century, and many of the manufacturing and production centers across the world are shifting to the eastern countries or Southeast Asian countries. For example, the apparel industry and the garment industry and many other labor-intensive industries have already shifted their manufacturing base from Europe and China to countries like Vietnam, Thailand, and India. So, India being placed at the nerve center of this trade means that India is controlling a huge volume of trade between Europe and Southeast Asia in the 21st century. This opens up a sea of opportunities for India's imports, exports, and manufacturing. Now, let's move on to the second aspect, that is India's connectivity with Central Asia. India lacks direct land access to Central Asia because a part of Kashmir called Pak-occupied Kashmir is being controlled by Pakistan. But Central Asia is a very important region from the Indian standpoint because of its abundant presence of oil and gas reserves. In the past, India has attempted several measures such as connecting India's west coast with the Chabahar port in Iran and from there to Central Asia through the Zaranj-Dilaram highway in Afghanistan. But this idea had to be shelved because of the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. Now, with the coming of India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, India can attempt to bypass the Pak-occupied Kashmir again through the United Arab Emirates and Iran. But then the mountainous northern borders of Iran again poses a problem. Now, let's move on to the third aspect, that is countering Belt and Road Initiative of China. Belt and Road Initiative of China is an extensive land connectivity initiative envisaged by China by connecting its industrial centers to Central Asia and Eastern Europe. The successful completion of this initiative means that the whole of Central Asia and many countries in the Eastern Europe will be under the Chinese influence, and the influence of the democratic world will be very limited there. This means lack of access to the market and lack of access to energy resources from Central Asia to the European and other Asian countries like India. So, as you can see, the influence exerted by Belt and Road Initiative is being counterbalanced by the coming of India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. Therefore, countering the China's influence by democratic world is a non-stated initiative of India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. Now let us come to the fourth aspect, a very important aspect of geopolitics, that is the emergence of a new Cold War. The emergence of a new Cold War between Chinese bloc and the US bloc is in the pipeline for a long time now. The rise of China and its standing up against the United States clearly give an impression of this kind. If such a Cold War will emerge, countries like Russia, Mongolia, China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and many other Central Asian republics and Eastern European countries will align with China. On the other side, that is the US side, there will be European Union countries, Gulf Cooperation Council countries, India, ASEAN, Australia, Japan, and South Korea. Now, if we can draw an imaginary line separating the US bloc and the Chinese bloc, we'll clearly understand that in the Asian continent, this imaginary line roughly coincides with the India Middle East Europe corridor, which means mostly the countries that are lying north of this corridor falls under the Chinese influence, and the countries which are lying south of this corridor or along this corridor comes under the US influence. Now, this is the geopolitical reality of 21st century.